What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Wednesday, July 19th. My name is Ewan, and on today's episode, we're going to get into some F1 fantasy with a 2023 Hungarian Grand Prix preview. But there is way more to talk about than just Hungary. Daniel Ricciardo is back on the grid. The British Grand Prix happened. I did not do a video for that. I was on vacation. So we're going to review some of that, talk about the new prices in the game, and some potential big changes in our lineups coming along quickly here. But let's just see what's going to happen for the entire episode. Ricciardo back, British Grand Prix preview, check in on some of the stats, get into the Hungarian Grand Prix preview with the schedule, the weather, talk about McLaren versus Aston Martin. I think it's going to be very interesting this weekend. Some potential transfers and then the upcoming schedule. It is the second to last race before the summer break. So get your F1 fantasy fix in while you can, because it is going to be a long month without the game and without those 20 drivers zooming around the grid. But first things first, probably the biggest story of the last week in Formula One is Danny Ric is back on the grid. He is replacing Nick de Vries as the AlphaTauri driver. He will be going head-to-head against Yuki Tsunoda. Little career bio here. Last team he was with was McLaren. Didn't end all that well. He ended up as a reserve driver for Red Bull this year. But after Nick de Vries did not perform well, it seemed like the writing was on the wall for a couple of races at least. Daniel Ricciardo was in the middle of the Silverstone tire test, I believe, and that's when the call was made to replace Nick de Vries with Daniel Ricciardo. He is going to go straight into the game at Nick de Vries' price, $4.5 million. Some unfortunate information is that if you were trying to be clever, which I did think about, and just get Nick de Vries into your lineup before Daniel Ricciardo switched, the game has actually made Nick de Vries an inactive player, so you still have to use another transfer to get Daniel Ricciardo in the game. I do not agree with that decision at all. Not really fair to the people that were trying to think ahead, be a little bit smarter with the game. Very unfortunate that happened to them. So hopefully they can recover, or you can just activate that wild card, which is in my thoughts this week for other reasons. And you would not get that transfer penalty. So it's definitely something to think about there. But as far as Ricciardo's prospects for this season, the AlphaTauri has been called not great, an S box by some. And I'm not sure how well Ricciardo is going to go in the AlphaTauri, but I think it's more to do with who could potentially replace Sergio Perez in the not so distant future. Yuki Tsunoda going head-to-head with Daniel Ricciardo. That's going to be a good test for both. Yuki just took down Nick de Vries. He's potentially could take down Daniel Ricciardo here. That will be 2 notches in his belt in AlphaTauri and could definitely propel him into the second Red Bull seat should it become available. As for Ricciardo, he pretty much has to show that he can beat Yuki to want to get back into that Red Bull seat. He took a couple of months off, said he got the thirst or the hunger to drive again as soon as the season started. So good for Daniel Ricciardo. Not so great for Nick de Vries. Too bad, so sad. He wasn't really endearing himself to the F1 fan base, and the results were kind of going that way. But Nick de Vries' final race was at Silverstone, the British Grand Prix. One of the races of the year. I'm not going to say it's the best race of the year, but it's for sure up there. Lando Norris, McLaren, Oscar Piastri stole the show the entire weekend, qualifying 2-3 on Saturday. And Lando Norris even led a few laps for Max Verstappen just to give us some hope. But the McLaren was flying around the track. Everyone in the team did come out after the race and say that Silverstone and Austria suit the car's characteristics, high-speed corners. Hungaroring is going to be a lot different, which is why, or is one of the reasons why I'm not sure if I'm going to go all in on the Papaya this week, despite the title of the episode. Lewis Hamilton picked up another podium at Silverstone in third place. Safety car kind of costing Oscar Piastri his first podium in F1, but he still had a career best 4th finish. Ferrari going to Ferrari, but yeah, it was not a great day for Aston Martin, and McLaren has jumped up the standings in the Constructors' Championship. They have left Alpine in the dust. So it's definitely turning into kind of a four-way fight for second place as best of the rest behind Red Bull. Certainly interested to see what happens in Hungary this weekend. Facts and stats here. Optimal team, finally a shakeup. Red Bull, McLaren, Verstappen, Perez, Norris, Piastri, Albon. That was based on a $112.4 million budget, which is the highest that we can have at this moment. But the actual cost was only 109.7. So hopefully you've been getting those price rises because that is a costly lineup. Positions gained. Sergio Perez's crap Saturday ended up in a fantasy gold mine on Saturdays. They had 9 positions gained and 9 overtakes. Valtteri Bottas, positions gained. There were some DNFs. Hamilton there, but fastest pit stop. McLaren just doing it all here. They got the car upgrades and they got the fastest pit stop for the day. But yeah, just like a crazy good weekend for McLaren and also for Williams. Alexander Albon's there on the optimal team, but he had a great 3 practice sessions, another Q3, and just held it all together. And give him 2 more laps, I think he was going to take down Fernando Alonso in that Aston Martin, but it was not meant to be, unfortunately. I think my cat agrees with that. Drivers' points here throughout the season. The Britain was Silverstone, PPR, last 3 over here. You can see Lando Norris all the way down there at 8th on the season, but 23 points per race in the last 3. That's better than Fernando Alonso, although he now does he's jumped up a lot. So he still costs. So Fernando Alonso is still the better points per million. We're going to do a little bit of a head-to-head on them later in the episode. You can just check the timestamps down below to skip ahead if you don't have the time to listen to the whole episode. But while you're right there, you can just hit that like or subscribe button. It would help me out a lot. Just let me know that you are enjoying the channel and the episode. Last week, I actually started doing some Fantasy Premier League content, but I'm still going to stay loyal, obviously, to F1 Fantasy as the season enters the summer break. After Austria's massive point swing with the 3 times DRS boost that I used on Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez's great day, I've jumped into the top 20K in the world. So really trying to push on now. And there's potential that I could use one more chip this weekend, but I'm not sold. Going to try and talk it out here. But yeah, that's the top 10 in driver fantasy points. Bottom 10 here. Zhou Guanyu, 6 points. He finally got that price rise that we were all begging for after it seemed like he couldn't do anything to get the price change. Magnussen with a minus 19 there after DNF. Logan Sargent has another pretty decent weekend, 6 points for him. He's now in the positive on the season. He does not actually cost you points to just have in the lineup. So good job for the American there. And Alexander Albon, points per race last 3, 13.67, just behind Piastri at 14.3. Those guys would easily be in the top 10 with those marks. Constructors here, kind of the same old, but McLaren with 63 points. They've now jumped Aston Martin over the last 3. They're getting there on the season. They're 5th in the Constructors standings and in the fantasy standings after Alpine's miserable weekend. Red Bull running away with it as per usual, but Mercedes, decent weekend for them. George Russell had some words on the radio about the timing of the safety car, but overall it was pretty good for the Silver Arrows. But Ferrari they want to forget about Silverstone. After taking home the win last year with Carlos Sainz, they did not have one to remember a couple of weekends ago. Driver of the week, the Papaya has Landoed. It's a bit of a stretch with that title, but Lando Norris had a great weekend, qualified second, finished second, led a few laps of the race, had 1 overtake going in that first corner. That was hearing the Silverstone crowd go after that was phenomenal. I have a typo right here, fantasy points 22. It was more than that because he became the 3rd driver this season to score at least 29 points in back-to-back races. Only Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez have also done that. And his 23 points per race in the last 3 races is the 4th best on the grid behind Verstappen, Perez, and Lewis Hamilton. So good job by Lando. Driver price changes, risers here, no surprise. Well, Charles Leclerc going up, whatever. But yeah, Sergio Perez got the overtakes. Lewis Hamilton went up a bit. Max Verstappen got the W. He's going to keep rising. He might hit 30 million by the end of the year. We'll see. George Russell, disappointing, but still went up. Lando Norris was the big jumper, 1.5 million. So if you want Lando in your team, it's going to take a little bit of budget finagling this week in the F1 fantasy game. Oscar Piastri also jumped up a million here, along with Fernando Alonso, still going up 0.5 because he's still great value for money. Alexander Albon, Zhou Guanyu, and Logan Sargent also rising. Logan Sargent is now tied with Daniel Ricciardo for the second cheapest asset in the game because Nico Hülkenberg is still 3.8 million and Albon is just flying up those price charts. So watch out Lance Stroll and Valtteri Bottas because Alexander Albon is coming for you. As for the fallers, Carlos Sainz, miserable weekend, Esteban Ocon with a DNF, and Kevin Magnussen with a DNF. Kind of like an overview of the pricing changes. I'm not sure if people are going to fall that much anymore. Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen both DNF'd, and they fell 0.1. They're both having pretty miserable seasons, and they still only fell 0.1. So I think it's still to be determined where all of these price rises are coming from. If it's the last 3 races, the last 2 races, just the last race. Hopefully over the summer break, I will get into some spreadsheets and figure it out. Or maybe someone smarter than me will just give us the answer on Reddit or one of the F1 fantasy discords, which would be greatly appreciated. And they will definitely get the props on this channel. As for constructors, risers again here, minimal, not so much gains, but the big one again, McLaren jumping up 1 million, Aston Martin going up 0.5, and Williams going up 0.5 as well. And a couple of followers with the 2 teams that had the DNFs going down here. All of those prices are from the fantasy website, and they change right after the race, probably like 6 or 7 hours afterwards. So not worth staying up for if you are in the European time zones like me. Just wake up on Monday morning and you'll figure it out there. Hungarian Grand Prix preview. Let's get into why we are all here. Like I said, I'll timestamp everything so you can skip around throughout the preview, but 70 laps, 14 corners, 2 DRS zones, been around for about 35 years. Very fun to play on the F1 game as well. That long straight and just the late braking zone into turn 1 can be quite chaotic if you're playing online or just against the computer on a very hard difficulty. Last year's race, George Russell took his first pole. He was ecstatic, couldn't quite hold on, but Mercedes did have a 2-3 finish here. Max Verstappen coming all the way from 10th place to win, which, I was rewatching the highlights of that qualifying. He was not very happy with how the car was set up or how it was reacting in qualifying. So hopefully, Red Bull should have everything they need to do to win this race. He would be the favorite once again, I would say, as they go for their 12th win in a row, and Max Verstappen goes for his 7th in a row. I still haven't done the math. I'm sure someone on F1.com has how early he can actually wrap up the title, but I do know he can finish second every race and still wrap up the title by the end of the year. So yikes there. Schedule is just a regular race weekend, 2 practices on Friday, free practice on Saturday, and a qualifying, with the Sunday being the big shebang, the Grand Prix. Lineup lock for qualifying is going to be 4 p.m. local time, which is going to be 10 a.m. Eastern. So make sure to wake up a little bit earlier on that Saturday morning if you're in the States and set those F1 lineups and check the practice reports, because those are going to be very important. Or will they? Because it is an F1 weekend, so there must be weather involved. Friday, Saturday, looks like we're going to see some rain. I'm not sure what time all of this precipitation is coming onto the track. Saturday looks like it could be pretty crazy. Hungaroring can get some weather almost every year. This is where the crazy Esteban Ocon race was a couple of years ago. So watch out for that. But it does look like Sunday will be a great race day. But the data collection on Friday, Saturday, qualifying could be a shakeup. Definitely stuff to watch. So Sunday could be a big day to gain some points. So don't be down in the dumps if your team doesn't look too good on Saturday evening after qualifying. Sunday is probably going to be a more normal day, and the best teams should come out on top. So maybe not a crazy race day, but qualifying could get pretty weird there. Now, this is the question that everyone has been asking for about 2 weeks now. Is it time to ditch Aston Martin in the F1 fantasy game? I went through here. I did Alonso versus Norris, Stroll versus Piastri, and just the constructors against each other, just to see how it's going. So here we have it. Lando Norris, 1.5 million more than Alonso, so more difficult to get him in. Last 3 points, just edging out his veteran former McLaren driver himself. Last 3 points per million, Alonso is still giving us more value, which is surprising because it's kind of felt like he's on the downslope, but that McLaren rise has been so meteoric that it's hard to not get excited about the Papaya right now. And the best result in the last 3 races is 28 points for Austria for Alonso and 38 for Norris in Silverstone, which is pretty decent, even if it was just a regular race weekend. But the fact that Norris had 38 on the same, like he had 10 more points than when Alonso had in a sprint weekend, just shows how much Norris has come on in the last 2 weeks as McLaren has brought those upgrades. Going into the secondary drivers here, Lance Stroll costs 0.6 more than Piastri. He's down 0.6 per race. He's not as good of a value either. Best result, 25 points in Austria, but Piastri with 20 in Great Britain probably means that he is the better driver. I think he's the better driver already, and I think he's going to be the better fantasy asset, along with the McLaren as the constructor. So they're 1.8 more than Aston Martin still. Last 3 points per race. I mean, it's very minimal. It's very close between these two teams. That's why it's going to be such a good debate over the weekend before lineups lock as to which team we put in, who are we swapping out, what's going on. So McLaren, there were 68 points in Silverstone compared to Aston Martin 63 in Austria. On a sprint weekend, I would probably say that Aston Martin are more of the steady Eddie, the kind of dance with the date that got you there kind of thing. But this could also be the last weekend that we can afford McLaren assets without getting priced out if we stick to the Aston Martin formula right now. So it's really tough. There's a lot of decisions to go into it. And one of the things that we have to think about is, do we use our wild card this weekend? Now, these are not the transfers that I am planning. These are just potential transfers that I was thinking about and why we would maybe use the wild card this weekend, because there are, I think, these 6 are the ones that popped off the top of my head, and we only get 3 free transfers a week. We get 2 free transfers a week, but 1 can roll over. We haven't had to use any of them this season, or many of them at all this year with how good the meta has been. But some people might be thinking they're done with Sergio Perez and his crap qualifyings. It could be time for George Russell, who's cheaper. Maybe he's a better bet for a price gain. Fernando Alonso out, Lando Norris in, Stroll out, Piastri in, and then one of the back markers there out for Daniel Ricciardo, and then Aston Martin out for McLaren. The thing about Daniel Ricciardo is the driver of the day is worth 10 points. There's going to be a ton of feel-good sentiment for the AlphaTauri driver to be back on the grid. It's a public vote. People are going to flood those polls. If he qualifies in 19th and he's in 16th with 10 laps to go, people are going to give him driver of the day. I don't think he's going to do better than Zhou Guanyu or Yuki Tsunoda, but this could be an opportunity to jump on an easy price jump, bag that, like the price gain that you just got last weekend with Zhou Guanyu or the last 2 weeks with Yuki Tsunoda. Bank that, go down to Daniel Ricciardo. It gives you some budget to get up to Aston Martin, or to get from Aston Martin to McLaren or Alonso to Norris, that kind of deal. It could all totally backfire. That's how it would go in fantasy games for anything. But certainly something to think about if you're kind of trying to think ahead. Like once Ricciardo goes up, he's probably just going to keep shooting up. So you might want to keep him on your team as he's rising. Nick de Vries wasn't doing as well as Yuki Tsunoda, so there is more in that car than Nick de Vries was showing us. Is Daniel Ricciardo the guy to get it out of it? We're going to find out. Let's just see what goes on with those first 3 practice sessions this weekend. But wildcard is in my thoughts. I'm not entirely sold on using it. I just wanted to talk it out and say that it is a potential time to use that, because I'm not sure how many more times we're going to really just want to totally swap our team out. And this seems as good an opportunity as any. Hungarian Grand Prix, my team preview. So here I am on the left. This is my current team. It's been going all right. Cost cap 110.6 million. I've got 3 transfers available, and I've got a trio of transfer options here. So bye-bye Aston version 1. Alonso out to Norris, Stroll down to Piastri, Joe down to Ricciardo. That gives me 2 Papaya. The Aston Martin still my constructor, and I get Daniel Ricciardo as my hopeful price bump. Bye-bye Aston Volume 2, or Version 2, is Stroll down to Piastri, Joe to Ricciardo, and Aston Martin to McLaren. And then the third option is back marker roulette, where I just go Joe to Tsunoda or Ricciardo, just however I'm feeling, see what the practice session is doing. If I don't want to really take a lot of risks, if I believe that Aston Martin are going to do well compared to McLaren, which has been touted quite a bit. People are saying Hungaroring, low speed corners going to suit the Aston Martin a lot more compared to the McLaren. So for right now, my favorite option here is going to be option B, because I think Joe to Ricciardo is kind of, I can do whatever with that. That's not a huge problem for me, although I do need to do that if I want to do the other 2 options. But Stroll to Piastri, I think Stroll out of Alonso, Norris, Stroll, Piastri, Aston Martin, and McLaren, those 6 F1 fantasy assets, Stroll is the weakest, in my opinion. So I would like to get him out. And I think McLaren with Piastri and Norris, that kind of, it gets you in the range that even if Norris doesn't do as well as Alonso, you're still going to get some of his points on Sunday afternoon. So I think this keeps the strongest Aston Martin asset, which is Fernando Alonso. I think you get rid of Stroll. If Stroll DNFs and you have Aston Martin, you're still going to get hit with that. I don't think Fernando Alonso is going to DNF. He's been pretty steady. He hasn't been outstanding. I think I was going to do some during the summer break. I'll be doing some like first half awards kind of thing just to make content. Hopefully you guys tune in by liking and subscribing to the channel. But I think keeping Alonso in is the strongest option at Aston Martin, and then you still get the coverage of Lando Norris with Oscar Piastri and McLaren as the constructor. So I think option B is the one I'm looking at right now. That only costs me 3 transfers, so that's good. I wouldn't have to use my wild card, but there are a lot more options that you could do. Like I said right here, all those transfers are possible this weekend. So definitely think about it. Could be a good time to use the wild card. You don't really get any extra points for it, but you can reset your team without taking any of those penalty hits. Because right now, I was like outside the top 150 before I used my 3 times DRS, and I jumped into the top 20K just with that. So the global rankings are super close. So you just have to kind of time your chips right. And I think wildcard might be the right time for this, but option B means I do not have to use that this weekend, especially with potential engine penalties coming out of the summer break. That sort of stuff might be nice to hold on to it. The schedule here for the upcoming races, we have another one in Spa next weekend, the Belgian Grand Prix. It's going to be a sprint weekend. Then it's the summer break. We're gone for a whole month. There will still be stuff coming out on this channel, first half awards, some updates on the back markers, chip strategy for the second half of the season. Definitely make sure to get some videos out there. And then we come back on the 27th of August with the Dutch Grand Prix. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the 2023 F1 Fantasy. Hopefully you've enjoyed the second half. I'll be back next week for the Belgian Grand Prix preview. Not going anywhere this time, and then it'll be the summer break. If you have any questions, reach out to me right there. Where are we? Here on Twitter at you in or you out. You can just hit me up there, and I will happily talk F1 Fantasy all day long with you. But yeah, like the channel, subscribe. Really appreciate any views, comments, feedback. Just let me know, and we can hopefully incorporate it into some future shows. But once again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.